Now, before you get too jealous of the folks that have hundreds of acres or more versus your small 40, I want you to consider there's a lot of ways that you can actually take that 40-acre parcel and make it seem like it's a huge parcel. On the flip side, there's ways that you can take a giant parcel, which most people do, and make it appear a lot smaller and having a lot fewer acres. And that's really unfortunate. We want to get the most out of our resources of time and money spent. I'm going to talk about some easy ways right here that you can turn your small parcel into a giant as far as how the deer relate to it and how you can affect your actual quality of hunt and quality of the herd. And number one, edge from above. If you have 40 acres and it's all hardwood timber, your potential is extremely limited. You need to have edge. Change of timber type, change of timber age, upland versus lowland, maybe a little wet area, a little bit of high area, hills, conifers, hardwoods, brush, briars. The more edge and the more diversity you have on the land, the more that it equals a greater potential for wildlife and whitetail populations, a much greater. In fact, think about a lot of federal lands and public land. There are so many public land parcels that an entire 40 does not attract one deer per 40-acre parcel because it's all federal timber. It's all managed for big, giant timber. There are a lot of state areas like that too, where we'll go into some federal lands. There could be a section of land, 640 acres within a big national forest. You might only have literally a handful, 2 or 3 deer for that entire 640 acres. On the flip side, you can take a 40-acre parcel that has a lot of edge, maybe a couple food plots, and we'll talk about the hunting pressure that you have to keep off of it. But we'll take a 40-acre parcel like that, and you could have 5 to 10 deer living on that regularly because you have diversity of habitat, you have balance of habitat, you have quality habitat, and it just simply supports more deer, and you don't spook them off. So big differences just right there, how you can take your neighbor has 1,000 acres of hardwoods. There's an area in southwest Wisconsin, I know they give drawings for hunting in there. It's 400 acres, it's surrounded by ag land, and in theory, you're going in there and hunting, and it's just shooting fish in a barrel because it's surrounded by great ag land, but it's all open, mature timber, and the people that hunt there hardly ever shoot a big buck because it's so open. When they go in there, they spook the deer, but at the same time, it's so open and it doesn't attract a lot of deer or wildlife in general because there's nothing for them, cover or food. So you can see from above, how does this look? There are 40-acre parcels, 1,000-acre parcels, maybe your neighbors, that have a lot of hardwoods on and they attract very few deer. And if you have great edge and a lot of diversity of habitat, you can attract several times more, 20 times more deer than conventional timber practices. And that's why a lot of MFL programs, managed forest law, state programs manage your timber, are bad for wildlife because they're great for timber, but very poor for wildlife. And that means your potential for having good wildlife populations on the property are severely handicapped when you enroll in some of these programs. Not all of them, not all the time. Can never say 100%, but bottom line is if you have a lot of old timber and your parcel looks the same with no edge from above, you're probably severely limited in the quality, size of the deer herd you have, wildlife population in general, and certainly the quality of your hunt. Number 2, big timber woes. It's something I want you to think more instead of edge. I want you to think in terms of just straight forage per acre. When you have a mature forest or taken out of acorns, you can't have a mature forest and have acorns and hold a lot of deer on it, just simply that. You have to have cover still for the deer, and the acorns are limited. So it's a very small window that you can even hold deer or beechnut or cherry, whatever that mass crop might be. But let's just look at mature timber. If you cut that timber, it goes from 50 to 100 pounds per acre of forage to 1,000 pounds per acre or more of forage. So when you look at a parcel anywhere, you can have about 15 times more forage by cutting on that parcel than not cutting. So that 1 acre is 15 times more valuable of cutting than someone that doesn't cut on it, just looking at straight food. So obviously if you have 40 acres, you might not want to cut the whole thing, but you cut 20 acres, you're going to have 20,000 pounds of forage per acre a year on that 40-acre parcel compared to the one next door. That 40, you might have 2,000 pounds of forage on it per acre per year compared to 20,000, and you only did something with 20 acres. And let alone if you just do 5-acre pocket here, a couple acres here, a couple acres there, the amount of just food in general, which deer have to have during the daylight, goes up greatly. So when you have that forage and you have that browse and you combine it with good food plots, the food plots can be 4 tons per acre. So completely different than 1,000, 8 times more, whatever that number is, 5 times more, 10 times more, it's a lot greater. So when you combine that food, you can have a 40-acre parcel with a couple acres of food plot and 20 acres of total cutting and still have mature timber on it for a lot of edge. Again, you're creating edge. Now you have a property that has 50 times more food than the one next door that's not cut. And that's what attracts wildlife and deer populations in general, let alone the cover it produces with stems per acre, because of all those stems coming out that equal food or cover. Hunting pressure. Doesn't matter how big your parcel is, 1,000 acres, 500 acres, 50. If you don't manage the hunting pressure, it makes that parcel look like a very tiny parcel. So there's a lot of parcels even around here, 1,000 acres, 500 acres, 400 acres, 700 acres. If they drive their four-wheelers through it, if they access with no idea what the wind is doing that day, and if they're spooking out food plots, what they're doing, spooking out bedding areas, getting on and off the property, if they drive through during the middle of the day gun season, then they take a parcel that's 500 acres and they push deer to the edges. And always remember, when a deer runs and spooks, it runs a half mile, not 200 yards and stops, it runs a half mile. So think about that, 160 acre parcel. When you're in the middle of that, you're a quarter mile from the edge in every direction. If you spook deer off your parcel because you're hunting haphazardly, then you're actually spooking deer a quarter mile off your property or more in all directions, because you're spooking them out of the center, let alone if you spook them from the sides, they might be a half mile off your property. We have parcels we go to where, because of lack of habitat, lack of food, not much of an attraction, and then poor hunting style, we have parcels where neighbors are shooting 180-inch buck or 160, 200-inch that the clients never actually saw in a 2 or 3 year period. Neighbors are getting pictures of them regularly, but those older bucks come to recognize the parcel as, hey, I need to stay off here, not only during the daylight, but after a few years, it doesn't even become a part of their wheelhouse. They're not even coming on it at all. So there'll be some does and fawns, young bucks, very deceiving. Boy, we have a lot of deer, but you're attracting the wrong kind of deer. You're not attracting a balance. And so when it comes to hunting pressure, that really truly is the lowest hole in the bucket, because you can take a parcel that has 0 edge, and if you don't put any pressure on it, and there's a lot of pressure around you, then you might have a couple bucks in there or some deer that get pushed in during the hunting season just because you're not going in there. But when you put it all together, lots of edge, reduce the hunting pressure, at least how it looks to the deer. Think about those parks you drive by in metropolitan areas that have tons of deer on, some big giant bucks that everyone knows about, but you can't shoot them because they're completely illegal to actually walk on. There's no way to get access. So if you shoot it, people want to know exactly where you shot that buck. The bottom line is they're there not because you created food sources, water holes, bedding areas. You might have some diversity. A lot of times that's got some lowland mixed in. They're there simply because there's no hunting pressure, and they recognize that. Depth of cover. I've been to 400, 500 acre parcels where there's a food plot every 100 yards on the property or another food source. They have trails that crisscross through the property. There's no depth of cover. There's no depth on that land where a deer can go 400 yards away from the front of that parcel, even on a large parcel, and be back in remote areas. There's another food source. There's more does, there's more fawns, there's more young bucks, there's more commotion. There's more stress because of the food sources. So a buck, eventually, if he lives, he grows out of the level of reclusiveness that he requires and finds it somewhere else. And he leaves. And a lot of times, all of a sudden, you passed up a buck till he was 3.5, 4. Think, man, that buck's gonna be giant. All of a sudden, someone shoots it 2 miles away because you pressured the land too much. There's food everywhere. There's no depth. Think about a 20-acre parcel. I give this example a lot, but a 20-acre parcel, you put 5 acres of food in the front. That means there's over 300 yards of depth in the back. You take a 40-acre parcel, put that 5 acre in the middle. There's only 155 yards of depth to the outside border in any direction. That 20-acre parcel, if you can't do anything else, is worth more to deer and deer management than that 40, because it lacks depth of cover. You multiply that over a 500-acre parcel with poor hunter access, more food locations where bucks are not going to bed, blowing your scent into different areas. You lack any kind of depth that a buck can actually go back to a mature area. We can typically look at an aerial photo, even if it's several hundred acres, and say, if there's mature bucks, I bet they're there or there or there, just simply by Xing it down and away from the food sources. Yeah, well, that's food, that's access, that's a hunting cabin. Bucks aren't going to bed around there, especially an older buck. So that leaves these areas right here as the only places a mature buck can bed, and they say, oh, well, we just added a food plot there. It's not a good thing. We just added a swimming pond or whatever there. Well, that means there's nothing there either. There's not going to be a mature buck. So you got to think about that depth. You always want at least 200 to 400 yards behind a food source, and it has to be thick and lots of cover, lots of screening first around the food, then thick cover for does and fawns to bed, and then those areas for bucks, and that'll give you that appropriate depth of cover. Compact daily movements, or daylight movements. You have good food, good cover. Again, you're working in that 200-300 yards of depth, 400 yards at the most. You want to have that layered system where these bucks that are back there 400 yards away, if they're pushed 700-800 yards away, they're probably not relating to that food source on a daily basis unless you're in extreme remote areas, wilderness areas, where deer are accustomed to traveling a long ways without any kind of interruption from their daytime bedding out in some swamp somewhere to an afternoon food source up in a hardwood knoll or wherever they're feeding at that moment on public land. So you want concise, compact movements that not only have good food and good cover, but good cover in between. So you can imagine a buck going from front to back during the daylight, never be spooked. That's why you want good screening around that food, good cover for does. And actually, if you don't have great cover for bucks, they'll probably still be there if it's remote, if you're never spooking them from there. And if you have that layering system set up where you have afternoon food, screening, doe and fawn cover, young bucks. It's almost like the further you get back and remote on the property, the less of a priority quality cover is. You just have to have cover that's unpressured and those bucks will be there. And then number 6, don't spook your food. This goes back into hunting pressure, depth of cover, everything else we talk about, where you cannot spook that food, because if you do, you can have a property that's 1,000 acres in an ag-rich area. There's lots of food on the property, and every time someone goes and hunts that, they spook deer on and off that food source. You turn that 1,000-acre parcel into 100 acres very, very fast. There's a lot of people that do well because they're the only ones hunting on 1,000 acres or 800 acres, and they do it despite themselves because the size of the property encompasses their mistake and poor choice of stands and poor movement when it comes to hunting strategy, and they do well despite themselves. Don't be that person. Instead, turn your 10-acre, 40-acre parcel into 100 acres or more by following these factors right here, knowing that you can actually do really well in most deer neighborhoods because most people with larger parcels are doing poorly because they've assembled habitat improvements that are based more on the quality of the improvement than actually allowing them to hunt the property successfully and strategically and get around without spooking game. There's a big difference between those parcels. The majority of people do it. That's why we have so many clients every year. We'll go to over 300 this year as a group. Wes, Dylan, Joe, Kevin, and I, where we have lots of people we can go to because a lot of people spend money on their parcels, and after 3 or 4 years, 7 years, they look at it like, what are we doing wrong? Because the neighbors have the big bucks over there and they don't. And we see these same things over and over again. Check these off the box and you can turn your tiny parcel into a giant parcel. It takes 1 season. This does not take years. It takes 1 growing season. It's a great time to plan right now in January, February to have a great hunt and a great herd by making your tiny parcel very big this fall. Now, I appreciate you guys watching the YouTube channel, but I don't know if everyone knows everything that we have to offer, whether it's on whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, our website, or WHS Wildlife Blends, our seed company. Also Instagram you can check out. I'm very active on Instagram, putting strategies on there, photos of what we do every day. Much more active there than Facebook. But our seed, web classes, books, clients, articles. I have over 600 articles on whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, everything whitetail strategy. Of course, we have hats on there, and then make sure to check us out on Instagram again. But lots of stuff to offer. We're always coming out with new things, and this isn't the end of it. We have more things coming soon. Make sure to check us out.